If anybody's in the sound room, you can go ahead and put our PowerPoint up, if you will. There we go. Thank you very much. All right, studying the ABCs of the Bible. We talked about the letter G and God last week. This week is letter H, if your alphabet's the same as mine. And any guesses as to what the word H is? Some of you know. We had this conversation Sunday night last week at dinner. Anybody know or have a guess as to what H might be? Holy is a good guess, but it's not it. No, not heaven. It's good. 1,807 times this word is used.
What was the first one mentioned?
Holy and heaven have been said. Not hope? Yeah, house. Very good. House or household or home. A lot of uses. And that's kind of the thing, or kind of the trend, if you've noticed over these. The words that we think about, spiritual words, holy and heaven, are not used as much as just common words that talk about telling stories but most certainly the word house has spiritual implications, and we'll think about that as we go. But it's kind of the words that you don't typically think about that wind up being used a whole lot more than we may realize. Word house is used in 38 of the 39 Old Testament books, 18 of the 27 New Testament. The only Old Testament book that does not use the word house is not Genesis, not Song of Solomon. That would be my guess, but it's not. Old Testament. Yeah, Old Testament. There are several New Testament that don't use it. I don't know if Revelation does or not, but Old Testament. Somebody probably knows it, they're just not saying it. Not Ruth. Good guess, though. It's Jonah. Which makes sense if you think about the 4 chapters of the book of Jonah. There's no mention of a house there or a household. So that's the one prophet that doesn't use it. The book that uses it the most is the book of 2 Chronicles. Why would the book of 2 Chronicles use the word house so much? What's taking place in the book of 2 Chronicles? Do we know where 2 Chronicles is in our Bible? Maybe that's where we need to start.
Maybe Joe the author forgot to put it First Chronicles, so he decided.
Okay, maybe so. Yeah. 2 Chronicles is the building of the temple, which is what? God's house. And most of the time when the book talks about it, it doesn't call it the temple. It calls it the house of the Lord. And it's used a lot in the book of 2 Chronicles. I think like close to 150 times. Because it's talking about God's house, the building of that house. Let's begin with some kind of discussion type based questions before we dive into our lesson. What words come to mind when you hear the word house? Right? When I say house, what comes next other than mortgage? Right? What's the next? What words come to mind when you think about house? Huh? Okay, a foundation. Yeah. What else? Do what now? Okay, a family. Yeah. Good. What else? Okay, a shelter, protection of some kind. Good. What else? Comfort. Okay. Work. Yeah. You got a house, you better put some work into it. You better cover your pipes this week. Okay, yeah. So here's the second question, because we're diving into that a little bit. What comes to mind when you hear the word home? But is there a difference in how we use those words? I mean, they're both talking about the same thing. But when we think about the word house, we typically think about the structure, right? We think about the foundation. We think about the shelter. We think about the pavements, the utilities, the work. We think about home. That's when we think about comfort. We think about family. We think about a place of safety, a place by which we can come and be ourselves. Both of those things are talking about the same thing, but we approach them differently, whereas one is talking about a physical structure and one's talking about a people. And so as we go through the Bible and as we read this, we're going to see both of those things kind of come into play, and we'll spend some more time maybe discussing that at the end of our lesson if we have time. Here's how the Bible uses the word house. Here's how it appears. It's used several times to think about what we think about, the structure. Okay, Matthew chapter 2, at the birth story of Jesus, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother. They fell down and worshiped him, talking about those wise men that have made their trip over. They find Jesus in a house. That's a structure of some kind that these people go into. Right? It's a building of some degree. Matthew 7. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. You're probably familiar with that story and that little song we sing at Vacation Bible School. The wise man built his house on the rock. Well, Jesus is using the word house in that parable, in that teaching moment in the Sermon on the Mount. He's using it to describe a structure, to describe a building. One built it on the rock, one built it on the sand. But as all parables are, there's a message behind that. There's a meaning behind that about building your spiritual house. But in this text, he's talking about a physical structure in the scenario, in the parable. John chapter 2, he told those who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. His disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. This is John 2, the cleansing of the temple, the house of the Lord, as 2 Chronicles will put it. And Jesus comes in and he cleans out that house, a physical structure. It's not a house like Jesus would have been in Matthew 2 when the wise men come and visit him, but it still is a house, as in a structure, as in has a foundation, right? That's how the Bible uses it sometimes. Other times, the Bible uses the word house to talk about the people, as we've already used the word house to talk about people, to talk about the family, to talk about the connections there. Joshua 24, if it's evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you'll serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Does that mean that every time you ring the doorbell on Joshua's house, it sings a hymn rather than makes a chime? No, he's not talking about his physical house. He's talking about the people in his house, his household. And so we're not thinking about a structure here, but thinking about a people that's here. Matthew 10, these 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All of Israel doesn't live in one house. That's a people of Israel, the nation of Israel, families, tribes that make up that. That's where these men were supposed to go. Not supposed to go to the Samaritans, but stay within the nation of Judea, the nation of Israel to some degree. Acts 16, believe in the Lord Jesus, you will be saved, you and your household. Right? The people that are in that house. That's the conversion of the Philippian jailer. Hey, if you want to become a Christian, your entire house can become a Christian. People that are in that. So we use this word in the Bible to think about a structure or to think about the people. And we probably knew that. You're probably saying, Austin, I know that's what that means. But we need to keep that in mind when we're reading the Bible as we read the word house to think, how is this word being used here? Because there are some passages where it describes both of those things. Joshua chapter 2, behold, we came into the land, you tie his scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, talking to Rahab. You shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of this house into the street, his blood guilt will be on his own head, but we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. There's three times it's used to talk about a structure. One time it's used to talk about the people that's in there. And the English Standard Version helps us because it uses the word household rather than house. But not every translation's that way. Sometimes it talks about house in both of those. Matthew 10, as you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come on it. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. As you enter the structure, are the people there worthy or not? Jesus will tell his disciples, there are some people where they won't accept you, shake the dust off your feet and keep going. They're not worthy. They're not receptive. They're not listening to what we're trying to teach and share with them. Two uses of the word house to describe two different ways. There's a couple other times in the Bible where it's used to describe the contents of the house, but these are very, very few. Like Luke chapter 20, beware of the scribes and all who walk around in long robes, who love greetings in the marketplace, seats in the synagogues, places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses, and for pretense make long prayers, they'll receive their condemnation. It's not that these Pharisees were going in and taking homes away from people, but they're taking everything these women had. And these women were left with nothing. And so it was described not necessarily the structure, but the contents of that. And so that's very seldom But sometimes that's the way the Bible describes it. As we talked about in our sermon this morning, there's a large portion of the Bible in which people lived in a world with no home. And that's the place that we need to be, spiritually speaking, a place with no home. We have great comforts here, too many comforts here. And we're so comfortable in our homes, we're so comfortable in our way of life that we don't long for heaven. We don't think about eternity. Most Americans never consider what happens after death. If they do, they may think about it for a minute and then kind of move on because our life here is so good. Our life here is so easy. And you can ask many of our Ukrainian friends or other people who have had all that they've known taken away within a matter of a few minutes, how quickly all the things that we take comfort in can be gone. And, well, we live in the United States, the greatest country in the world, so many people say. Don't think that we're above anything. There are some folks in California right now who never dreamed they'd be in the position they're in. Some folks in North Carolina after a hurricane who never dreamed they'd be in the position that they're in. So don't look and take so much pride and arrogance in our structures to think, oh, nothing's ever going to happen to me. The people in the Bible lived in a world which they really had no physical homes, not of a permanent nature, lived in tents, things that moved, things that constantly had to be mended and repaired. And so we need to have that same sort of mentality that this world that we have really is no home to us at all. God's dwelling place, the tabernacle, was a place that was portable and then became a place that was stationary in the temple. But we're so far removed from this culture. We're so far away from it that we seldom ever spend time to think about a world with no home. Is there some things we could do to help us have a more spiritual mindset when it comes to home and comfort and security? Rather than placing all of that hope on insurance policies, what if we had hope in heaven? Are there some things we could do to help us with that mindset? Or does it take having everything we own ripped away from us? That's typically when we start thinking about things in heaven, is when we don't have things here. When all of a sudden we realize how fragile life is here, we then start thinking about life there. Is that what it's going to take? Is that really what it takes for us to have that spiritual mindset? Is for us to lose everything we have here? Or is there something else we could do? Or is that a question to which there is no answer? Maybe just something to think about then. Let's think about houses, right? What do houses consist of? Some of you have built houses. Some of you work in construction and work in this process. And so there's a lot of detailed answers to this question. What does a house have? Well, it has a lot of things. So don't get too technical here, but let's just think about houses. What do houses have? Because 1 Peter chapter 2 describes us as Christians coming together to build a house. As you come to Him, Jesus, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves are like living stones. You're being built up as a spiritual house, to be the holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So Jesus, or Peter, uses this analogy to talk about Christians are becoming a house. We're built on a foundation, we're built on a cornerstone, which is Jesus, right? But we are a spiritual house. So we compare that to a physical house. What are some things that physical houses have, right? I've got a short list. Maybe you can come up with some more. And I'm going to need some readers if we have some folks who are ready to read this morning. One thing that houses all consist of is a foundation. You don't have a foundation, you don't have a house very long. Does somebody want to volunteer to read 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 10 through 15? All right, thank you, Jim. 1 Corinthians 3, 10 through 15. Now, some of you others get ready and stretch those arm muscles, ready to raise them and volunteer, right? We've got a room full of people who need some readers. So y'all be in the bullpen, right? Working it up, getting ready to volunteer. 1 Corinthians 3, 10 through 15, thinking about a foundation. And once again, we know physical houses have foundations, but as we read this passage, we're thinking about our spiritual house, right? Our spiritual foundation. All right, whenever you're ready. All right, thank you very much. There can be no foundation that's laid other than Jesus Christ. You're building on anything other than Jesus, your house will fall. That's also Matthew chapter 7. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. Foundations is where it all starts. If we're not building on Jesus, our house falls. And then the question becomes, well, what do we build with? And we'll think about some components here in just a moment. But 1 Corinthians chapter 3 talks about that down there in verse 12. If anyone comes and builds on that, and you have all these things you can build with. I don't know who wrote the Three Little Pigs. Some of you might. But I wonder if he read 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Right? Because the first pig builds his house out of straw, the other one builds it out of sticks, the last one builds it out of bricks. And what happens when the big bad wolf comes and huffs and puffs and blows them down? They're tested. Right? The straw didn't stand, the sticks didn't stand, but the bricks did. That's verse 12. There are people who build, and they build with precious stones, or with gold or silver, things that last. And then there are people who build out of wood and straw. And when those things are tested by fire, one stands and one doesn't. Right? And so what are we building on and what are we building with? It's our decision. There's only one place we can build that's going to last. That's Jesus. Paul tells us that. Paul says, that's where I'm building. That's where I want you to build. And what are you building your house out of? Houses have foundations. Houses also have roofs. Right? Most houses have roofs. A place of shelter. A place of protection. All right. Psalm 27 verse 5. Somebody? All right. Thank you. Psalm 61:4. All right, Tyler, Revelation 7. All right, Clint, thank you very much. We've still got a few more, so if you missed your opportunity, you don't have to get all upset. You'll have more. Psalm 27, verse 5. I'm joking. I appreciate having good readers in this class. I've been a part of guest speaking at places and mission trips and places. You ask folks to read, and nobody reads, so you have to read the whole time. I appreciate we've got good readers and volunteers. I really appreciate you doing that. 3 passages that talk about our shelter, our protection, our roof, spiritually. Psalm 27 and verse 5.
For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle he shall hide me. He shall hide me high upon a rock.
Yeah, he will hide me. That version used the word pavilion. I like that. A shelter, something that's going to cover me, that's keep me protected in this time of trouble. And that's kind of, you read through the book of Psalms, you see the highs and lows of David's life. Sometimes my life is really good and I'm praising God. That was our welcome this morning that Reese read for us, if we can remember back to 9 o'clock, right? We are praising God because of his indescribable gifts. And then there are other Psalms in which we're very, very low. And in times of distress and times of anguish, and we're crying out to God for help. And that's Psalm 27. Hey, when I face those difficulties, I hide under your pavilion because, God, you're the one that's keeping me sheltered, keeping me safe. Right? All right, Psalm 61 and verse 4. Yeah, let me take shelter under the refuge of your wings. Thinking about a bird, how keeps their young under their wings and keeps them protected there from dangers, from being vulnerable, and how perfectly that describes God sheltering us as we think about maybe even a home of some type. And then the book of Revelation, chapter 7 and verse 15. Okay, he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Other translations use the word, he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. But he covers them, he holds them there. Several more, especially in the book of Psalms, several more passages that we could look to think about God being our refuge, our place of safety, a place of comfort that we can go because, well, homes have roofs, that's what they're there for. But what holds the roof up from the foundation? Right? Houses have to have walls. They have to have structure. They have to have things that hold them in place and provide organization to some degree. Anybody want to get Ephesians chapter 2, 19 through 22? All right, Jeff, thank you. I was about to say, just after I bagged about good readers. No, I'm just joking. Ephesians chapter 2, 19 through 22. Now, we're not going to find in this passage the word walls, right? We're not going to think about drywall or think about paneling or brick or whatever, but we're thinking about the structure of the church, the organization. That's what holds us spiritually together. As 1 Peter talked about, we're becoming a spiritual house. Well, spiritual houses have to have some sort of structure in order for them to be built, in order for them to stand, and that's Ephesians chapter 2. Jeff, whenever you're ready.
Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple of the Lord, in whom ye all also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit.
Thank you. A lot of building language. You're built on the foundation. Jesus is the cornerstone. Apostles and prophets have built on that. You and I, hopefully, are building on that foundation. And we're coming together in this framework, in this structure, being joined together to become this temple of God. So what is the walls? What's the structure of the church? Well, you and I are. Saints are. Christians are. We're the structure of the church. If Christians were not here, we wouldn't have a church. I'm not saying we're what holds the church up. That's what God does. But He's holding us up, isn't He? Right? We are the people. We are the ones building on that foundation, and we've come together to create this beautiful structure of the church. As we think about those walls and we think about those structures, if all we have is walls, we're not getting anywhere. Our walls have to have a door, don't they? They have to have a door. And so Jesus gives us insight to being a door. John chapter 10, 7 through 10. All right, thank you, Brian. John 10, 7 through 10. And you can see I'm, thinking this week about our class, have to get kind of creative in how we're thinking about building a spiritual house. And some of these words we're using, carpet's not on our lists, and cabinets are not in our list, but some of these things that houses have that the Bible talks about Jesus being. And so we could get really technical with this, and my illustrations would run out. But there's a few of them here that kind of apply. John chapter 10, 7 through 10, whenever you're ready.
Jesus said to them again, most surely, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly.
Yeah, thank you. That use of the door, especially in this context, the door of the sheep. And you might think if our minds could go back to Jesus' world in which there are no fences, there are no electric fences, we take our sheep and we go to where grass is. And in so doing, we have shepherds that stay with them all the time. We don't just put them in a pasture and check on them once a day. We're with them all the time. And at night is when they're most vulnerable to predators, to thieves coming and taking these sheep. So we put them in a sheepfold, which is typically some sort of structure, maybe a circle or a square that's made out of rocks that's up so high, it's built up out of stones, and then there's an opening in it. Of course, you have to have a way to get the sheep in and out of it, so you don't put rocks or things there. You have this opening, and how do we keep the sheep from leaving, and how do we keep the bad people from coming in? The shepherd becomes the door. He sits, or he lays, or he sleeps in that opening of that sheepfold so that the sheep don't leave and thieves don't come in. And that's what Jesus says is, hey, when it comes to you, I'm willing to be that door. I'm willing to help hold you in the presence of God and keep the bad things from coming in. He's the door that's there. And I love the way that that's painted for us as Jesus being the door. The last one, we read this in our sermon this morning, John chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, as we think about our home having rooms, right? The doors leading to these various rooms. Somebody want to read John 14, 1 through 4? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Parrish. John 14, 1 through 4. And we think about these places or these rooms that God is preparing for us, a place that each one of us has. John 14, whenever you're ready.
Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know.
All right, thank you very much. So Jesus at this Last Supper with his apostles say, hey, I'm going to prepare a room for you, a mansion for you, a dwelling place for you. Growing up, did everybody have their own room, or did you have to share with a sibling or share with somebody else? Right, or share with an animal or something, right? A lot of us probably didn't have our own rooms. We had things we shared with people. And that was always perfect harmony, wasn't it? Sharing a room with your sibling. I mean, you always got along, didn't you? Everything was just perfect that way? Probably not, right? They're touching my things. They're borrowing my clothes. They're, whatever it might be. We like to have things that are our own. And that's what Jesus is stressing. I'm going to prepare a room for you. That word mansion in some translations dates back to many, many years ago when the King James Bible was written. That word mansion in that context just meant an individual dwelling place. It wasn't an apartment. It wasn't a place that you shared, a house you shared with somebody, an individual dwelling place. And so our world thinks mansion, big house on a hill. But when that word was put in the English Bible, it just meant a place for you, a room for you. That we're not going to get to heaven and say, oh, we're out of vacancies. You have to go to the hotel on the road. There's a place for us, prepared for us. Each and every one of us have a room that's there. Any other spiritual building components you can think of and passages you can think of? Yeah.
So I have two of them. Rooms was one of them, but I was thinking of it from a different aspect. I was looking at it from with rooms, they each have purposes.
Okay.
And so for us, the rooms within our own house represent different areas of our life.
Yeah.
And so, but we all are underneath one roof in that sense. So everything that we do, no matter it's word, play, whatever it is, God needs to be involved in that.
Yeah, that's good.
And then the other thing I was thinking about was utilities. From a spiritual nourishment standpoint, God provides us the power, the energy.
Yeah, good. So Eli's teaching this next week. I'll take it off. No, I'm joking. Yeah, good. What else? Do you think of any other spiritual house parts with Scripture?
Well, I was going back to the walls, like where that verse talks about being built up together.
Yeah.
And how useless a wall is when it's not connected
Yeah.
to another wall.
Yeah.
And I look at when I was a kid building forts. I mean, you get two walls that are complete opposite ends. When you put some sort of burden on top of it,
They fall.
fall over. And so we really have to work together
Yeah.
to support that.
Very good. Good analogies. Y'all are doing a better job teaching than I am. Think about what you're kind of going off of. I'm thinking about you walk into Lowe's or Home Depot, and they've got those little mock kitchens set up, and they've got the fake walls that only go up so high. It's like, that's kind of pointless to put that wall there. I see what you're trying to do, but the wall's doing nothing. And sometimes when we try to do that and we're not joined to everybody else, we're pointless. Good. What else? Think of anything else?
House always needs work, like, was it you that said that, Kenny?
Yeah. You need workers. Yeah. Yeah. Kenny must be having some projects at the house. He's kind of hung up all, no. Yeah.
If you look at houses, I mean, if you just leave it be in the amount of disrepair, there's a house near ours that nobody's living in it, it's just, in essence, falling apart.
Yeah.
There's been a constant effort on our part to maintain that house.
Yeah. If a house is not lived in or being used, it falls apart very quickly. Yeah. Spiritually speaking, if we're not using our spiritual house, we'll fall apart pretty quick. Good.
Along with that, you could go amenities. It's got its amenities, so like, I think the fruits of the Spirit, there's all the characteristics that we're supposed to have as people.
Yeah, good. My mind also went this way. What causes some people to leave home? We think about, physically speaking, you grow up and you get married and you leave home, or you go to college, or you move off and find work somewhere else, so you leave home for that. But why would people leave the church? If the church is home, why would people leave? And here's some examples of some people leaving. In Luke chapter 15, you have the prodigal son who left home because he had a lack of interest in what was going on. The city and that living was more appealing than home. It wasn't that home was bad. It's not like the prodigal son looks and he says, Father, you're abusive to me and you're mean to me and you don't feed me. I mean, his life at home was good, but something else was more interesting to him. He was more appealed by something else. So he took his inheritance and he ran and he lived. And then when he got there, he realized that those things he were interested in really weren't as good as he thought they were, and home was a whole lot better. And so the prodigal son, that passage in Luke 15 has both elements, him leaving home and him coming back home, because he realizes really what has great value. And there's a lot of folks who maybe became Christians or a church, part of the church for a while that no longer are here because something else interested them. They didn't get mad at God. It wasn't like, oh, I hate the church. That wasn't it. It's just, hey, this is always going on Sunday, and I'd rather be playing golf than that. Or, hey, we're more involved in this, and we play travel sports, and we can never be there anymore, and so we're putting travel sports over God. You know, whatever it might be, people have other interests. And you just hope in life at some point people finally realize that home's a whole lot better than those other interests are. Those other things fade pretty quickly. Home's where they needed to be, and maybe they'll come back home. You have some folks who leave because maybe they just don't quite understand. That's Simon the sorcerer in Acts chapter 8 who thinks he can buy the gift of the Holy Spirit. In Acts 19, you have the 7 sons of Sceva who see the miracles that is going on in the church, and they want to try to do those miracles. And by the God of Paul, I ask you to come out of him. They didn't know God, but they didn't understand. They didn't have all the information. And maybe some people fall away from the church. They leave the church because there's a misunderstanding. They don't understand the importance of being here. Maybe that's our fault. Maybe they have an inerrancy in Scripture, and so they go to a different church, a different denomination, a different religious group because of some misunderstanding. Maybe they're misinformed. They've been misguided. Maybe they just don't know. They didn't study. Whatever it is, there are people who don't understand the importance of home, of the church, and for that reason they drift away. There are people that are not motivated. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 talks about the second coming of Jesus and all the things that are going to happen. At the end of that, therefore be steadfast, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Well, why am I always supposed to be abounding in God's Word? Because of all of chapter 15. Jesus is coming back. Because Jesus is coming back, be busy, be active. You think about that phone call that you get. Hey, we're coming over. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Whoever it is. Well, you go into frantic mode, picking up and cleaning up and putting your laundry away and putting dishes away and throwing stuff in closets because somebody's coming in 10 minutes. I got to get things in order. Maybe that's just me. Jesus is coming back. I hope I have some things in order. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm serving. That's why I care about worship. That's my motivation. People are motivated by a lot of things, though. More motivated to work a lot of overtime, even if it means missing worship. I'm more motivated by, whatever it might be. Sometimes people leave because they're not connected, and that's sad. That's our fault for not reaching out and caring for people and investing in people. Hebrews chapter 2 talks about the dangers of drifting away, as if a boat having no anchor drifts in a harbor. We as people drift if there's not something connecting us. Now, we're most certainly connected to God, but we have to be connected to God's people as well, connected to the church. You can't be a Christian on an island. Christians are part of congregations, and if we're not connected, we drift, we leave. And then finally, lack of faith. Matthew 13 is the parable of the sower. The sower sowed seed in all these different places. The pathway, the rocky soil, the thorny soil, the good soil. Some of them grow and produce. Some of them don't. You think about the seed that falls on the pathway is immediately eaten by birds. But the seed that's sown in the rocky soil, it grows, but the sun scorches it. Why? Because it had no roots, had no depth of earth, had nothing holding it there. It never developed its faith. That Christian in the analogy there. And because of that, they weren't rooted. And when you're not rooted, you wind up drifting away. We've got 5 minutes, and I've got about 45 minutes more, so we'll just skip lunch. No, I'm joking. Let's think about coming to God's house, and I'd like to have some readers, but we're going to have 5 minutes, so let's just think about these together, and if you'd like to write these down and read these later, you can. The Bible talks about coming to God's house, and one of the analogies of that is coming to the tabernacle and temple in the Old Testament. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, the book that uses the word house more than any other book of the Bible, is when that temple is built and being dedicated, and God's Spirit comes and fills it, and the presence there. Psalm 122 and verse 1, I was glad when they said, let us go to the house of the Lord. I was thankful when they said, let us go to the house of the Lord. Do we have that same sort of mentality coming to worship as those folks in the Old Testament did? Going to the tabernacle, going to God's house. We sing that little song, or maybe you grew up singing, tiptoe, tiptoe in God's house. Tiptoe very softly. This building isn't his house. These people are. We are his house. And so from a 3-year-old's mindset, that song might be misleading. But I hope that we see God's house in worship because we see each other. These Christians that are being built on the cornerstone of Jesus. The Christian in the Bible is also described as God's house. That we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. That's why we conduct ourselves in certain ways. We already read 1 Peter chapter 2, being built together as a spiritual house. So God's house not only describes the tabernacle and temple, God's house also describes you and me. And so you notice the Old Testament saw God dwell in a structure. The New Testament sees the Lord dwell in a people. In the Old Testament, God was in a place. In the New Testament, he's in a people. And I love that God is with us. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. And because God is with me, his Spirit is with me, that hopefully makes me want to live a little bit more mindful of that. Mindful of what I put in my body, by what I see, by what I take in, by what I say, by what I listen to. All those things coming into God's temple. They most certainly would not let profane things in the temple in the Old Testament. Are we letting profane things in our temple, our body? Not just thinking about alcohol and drugs, but thinking about some other things we see and listen to and are a part of. Hopefully we monitor that because we're the temple of God. And then finally, the Bible describes heaven as being God's house. That is a place that we're going to. Psalm 23, the passage of the Lord is my shepherd. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thinking about heaven. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 describes heaven as being a place where God dwells and where we can dwell with him. As being his dwelling place. God's house is described as multiple places in the Bible. Let's do a little bit of discussion in the few minutes we have left. What makes a house a home? And how does that relate spiritually? You know, you've heard that phrase, we're making this house a home. Can we do some things to make the church become more of a home for people who would come here? Yeah, okay, so that's the thing about going home. It's a place I feel comfortable. I'm taking my shoes off and kick back in the recliner and go to sleep. You don't do that in other people's houses. You don't feel comfortable there, but you do that in your house because it's your home, the resting place. Yeah, and heaven ought to be that as well. Good spiritual application. What else? Okay, welcoming. Yeah, home ought to be welcoming. Have a welcome mat out front. We have things that should be inviting to people. You know, that's so ironic. We have all these things that welcome people, those little flags in our gardens and the signs on the door and the welcome mat, and people knock on the door and we hide in the bedroom and peek through the curtains to see who's there. It's like, we want you to feel welcome, but we don't want to welcome you. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes we do that as a church as well, right? Hey, everybody's come, welcome, here to visit, and then a stranger comes in. Who are they and why are they here? I hope we don't do that. Sometimes that's the case. Was something else said? Family. Yeah, that ought to be what makes a house a home is our family. And getting invested in a congregation, doing things with the young at heart, coming to men's prayer breakfast like we had yesterday morning, helps you get to know your family. Helps you get to know your family. And if we just come ever so often, you don't get to know your family that well. You've got some family you only see at Thanksgiving and Christmas. You don't know them very well. But the family you see more often, you do. And so is our attendance to worship and to church events, how sporadic is that? How faithful is that? How well do you know your family? Good, Kenny. What else? Do we know? Yeah, love. Maybe we could just summarize it all up in one word. Love is what makes a house a home. Yeah, maybe that's a good place to end. Next week we'll think about the letter I. So be thinking about I words.
I was going to say commitment.
Yeah?
Yeah.